You understand the odds are not in your favor, Vriad said, feeling an unexpected flicker of something. Not quite sympathy, but something in that neighborhood. In the past cycle, 43 fighters have attempted the 5-match challenge. 3 survived. None of them came from a species with your physical limitations. Marcus Chen had shrugged, a gesture Vriad later learned signified casual dismissal among humans. So you're saying there's a chance? A statistical anomaly, perhaps? The corners of his mouth had curved upward. Good enough for me. When do I start? Quilner had laughed, a sound like grinding gravel. Such confidence. I almost admire it. You will face a Pelthian scout in your first match, quick, venomous, and responsible for 4 deaths this season. The warden's smile had grown. After that, if you survive, the difficulty increases. Gormith bruisers, Zelfrem assassins, perhaps even a Kraxen if you last that long. And if I win all 5, then you walk free, human. Quilner's eyes had gleamed with predatory certainty. Though I would not waste time planning your victory celebration. The arena has a perfect record of humbling the overconfident. Vree had filed the paperwork and forgotten about Marcus Chen entirely, confident the Pelthian scout would resolve the situation within 3 minutes. He had been wrong. The first match had been, in Vree's professional opinion, a complete fluke. Slicks the Pelthian scout had a 93% kill rate, reflexes calibrated for the arena's environmental systems, and neurotoxin-coated claws capable of paralyzing a Gormith warrior in under 4 seconds. The match should have been finished in 3 minutes. 4, if the human got lucky. It lasted 17. Vree had spent the first 8 minutes of that fight checking the arena's environmental system for malfunctions, certain that something external was artificially prolonging what should have been a foregone conclusion. Marcus had been cut, poisoned, and bleeding from at least 6 separate wounds within the first 2 minutes. The neurotoxin concentration in his bloodstream should, by every pharmacological model available, have shut down his nervous system. Should have. Instead, the human had kept moving. His movements had grown sloppier, less precise, but they had never stopped. Slicks had grown frustrated, a dangerous state for a fighter whose entire technique depended on surgical precision, and had overextended on a lunge. Marcus had caught the Pelthian's arm, twisted it with a sharp crack of breaking chitin, and driven the creature's skull into the arena floor with focused, deliberate force. Medical impossibility. Dr. Fenton had reported afterward, his Queelix features pinched with professional bewilderment. The neurotoxin concentration in his blood should have rendered him comatose. His pain receptors should have been screaming loud enough to override all voluntary motor function. Yet his brain activity showed consistent, conscious override of autonomic responses. I have not seen anything like it in 30 years of arena medicine. Vree had filed a report, noted the anomaly, and doubled the difficulty for match 2. The second opponent had been Grumnak, a Gormith bruiser built like a collapsed building, regenerative tissue that could seal minor wounds between rounds, bones dense enough to bend steel, and a fighting style that relied entirely on the simple fact that nothing in the arena could hurt him as much as he could hurt it. The fight had been brutal and direct, a contest stripped of all elegance. Grumnak had broken Marcus's nose in the first 30 seconds, fractured his collarbone at the 1-minute mark, proceeded to pummel the human methodically against every available surface for another 8 minutes. Marcus had not gone unconscious. He had absorbed the punishment with an almost eerie patience, moving with the flow of the impacts rather than fighting them, preserving his awareness even as his body catalogued damage. And when Grumnak had paused to turn toward the crowd, just for a moment, just enough to acknowledge the adulation, Marcus had struck, a precise kick to the knee joint, exploiting a structural weakness that existed in Gormith physiology but that no arena fighter had apparently thought to research. Then a rapid series of strikes to the throat that left the massive bruiser gasping and disoriented, a chokehold that Marcus had maintained for 4 full minutes, braced against the arena floor, until Grumnak finally went limp beneath him. He should not have the strength, Vree had muttered, watching the replay for the 5th time. His muscles are not engineered for that kind of sustained output. The betting pools had shifted after match 2. The odds on Marcus surviving the full 5 matches dropped from 300 to 1, all the way to 70 to 1. Vree had found this irritating. Humans were supposed to be diplomatic creatures, builders, mediators, beings who resolve their conflicts through negotiation and technology. They were not supposed to be winning arena matches against species specifically evolved for combat. Match 3 had provided temporary reassurance. A Zelthram assassin named Cavrix had carved Marcus with surgical precision, leaving cuts across his chest, arms, and face with the razor blades extending from her forearms. Blood had flowed freely enough that Vree had genuinely believed it was over. The crowd had believed it too, falling into the anticipatory quiet of beings watching a mercy stroke. Marcus had won by throwing arena grit into Cavrix's eyes, a move so inelegant that half the crowd had actually booed, and then tackling the blinded assassin off the edge of an elevated platform. They had both fallen 7 meters. Only one of them had gotten up. Cheating, Mekros had complained. That was not honorable combat. There are no rules about honor in the arena, Vree had replied, though privately. Watching the replay, he had felt the first true seed of unease take root somewhere in his primary nervous cluster. Match 4 had been the longest, and in Vree's estimation the most disturbing. The opponent had been a Kraxen Berserker named Kolg, 2.5 meters of natural armor plating capable of deflecting plasma rounds, with enough raw strength to reshape structural metal with his bare hands. The fight had lasted 43 minutes. 43 minutes of Marcus Chen being thrown into walls, slammed into the arena floor, and subjected to violence that made even the bloodthirsty regulars in the upper tiers shift uncomfortably in their seats. He had been broken and reassembled and broken again by physics alone. And yet, when Kolg's movements had finally begun to slow with exhaustion, that inevitable biological ceiling that even the strongest bodies eventually reach, Marcus had picked up a jagged piece of broken arena flooring and begun methodically exploiting the gaps between Kolg's armor plates. 16 targeted strikes later, the Phyrexian had stopped moving. The betting odd now sat at 8-1 against Marcus surviving match 5. Vree had tripled his personal bet against the human. This was the end. The Kraxen champion would restore the natural order, because if he didn't, Vree was being forced to confront an idea that fundamentally unsettled his understanding of the galaxy, and he was not yet ready for that confrontation. Thorund the Unbroken had entered the arena to a sound that could only be described as devotion, thousands of beings on their feet, making every noise their biology permitted, for a creature who had never once given them reason for doubt. He performed his pre-combat ritual with the unhurried confidence of someone who had done this 4 to 7 times and found it uniformly satisfying. The flex and stretch of 4 arms, each corded with muscle capable of bending structural steel, the slow roll of the hammer-shaped head, the deep, resonant growl that rose from his chest and silenced the nearest tears with simple, primal authority. Marcus Chen had stood across the arena floor and watched him. He had looked small in a way that the word small could not fully capture. Tiny, fragile, a collection of poorly healed wounds wrapped in a tattered combat suit, his face a map of 4 previous matches written in scar tissue and bruising. His left hand showed the faint tremor of someone fighting to suppress pain responses. Even humans, Vree had observed, knew fear when it was appropriate. The bell tone had sounded across the arena, resonating through the reinforced glass of the observation pod, and Thorund had not wasted a moment on theater. He charged with the force of a cargo transport, all 4 arms extended, covering the distance between them with a ground-shaking momentum that displaced the air hard enough to stagger Marcus even as he threw himself left to avoid it. Thorund's fist struck the arena floor where the human had been standing a fraction of a second earlier, leaving a crater in the reinforced metal that Vree estimated was 7 centimeters deep. What followed was 23 minutes of systematic destruction. In the 5th minute, Thorund caught Marcus. 2 massive hands closed around the human's torso like a hydraulic press, lifting him off the ground, and the sound of that squeeze carried all the way to the observation pod, a sharp, dense cracking that made Vree's smaller eyes close involuntarily. Marcus screamed. It was the first time in 5 matches that the human had vocalized pain in any form, and the raw quality of that sound silenced even the most enthusiastic spectators for a long, terrible moment. He escaped by driving his fingers into Thorund's eyes, another inelegant, desperate move that bought him 30 seconds before the enraged Kraxen caught him with a backhanded blow and sent him across the arena like discarded debris. He hit the far wall with enough force to leave a visible dent in the metal plating. After that, the injuries mounted with merciless efficiency. A kick that bent his left arm wrong. A punch that fractured ribs already under structural stress. A throw that left him gasping and coughing blood onto the arena floor in dark, wet patterns. And then Thorund's finishing move, Both lower fists brought down simultaneously onto Marcus's back as the human tried to rise, a blow that struck with a weight of absolute finality and left the human collapse in a spreading pool of his own blood, face down, limbs arranged like a puppet whose strings had all been cut at once. The arena fell silent. Thorund raised all four arms. The crowd erupted. "He is finished," Ree announced, reaching for his datapad to begin tabulating results. On the screens below, medical teams were already preparing extraction equipment. Credits were flowing. Around him, the observation pod filled with celebration, appendages clapping together, mandibles clicking, voices raised in a satisfied chorus of beings whose wages had been rewarded by the natural order reasserting itself. Macros was chitting about how he had always known the human would fail, conveniently forgetting his earlier nervousness. Ree allowed himself a satisfied rumble and began counting his winnings. Then Marcus Chen moved. It started with a finger, just one finger on Marcus's right hand, twitching against the blood-slicked arena floor. Ree almost missed it, his attention divided between the datapad's financial display and accepting congratulations from the pod's other occupants. But something made him look, some combination of professional instinct and a nagging unease he could not yet name. The finger curled, became a fist. "Commander," Soth whispered, the Pelthian aide skin plates flashing from yellow directly to bright orange, the alarm color, reserved for genuine emergencies. "Commander, the human is moving." "Residual nerve activity," Ree said dismissively, not looking up, muscles firing randomly as consciousness fades. "It happens with some species that have primitive neural architectures." "No, Commander." Sotha's voice had taken on a quality Vree had never heard from him before. "Look." Vree looked. Marcus Chen's chest was expanding, not in the shallow, irregular gasps of the dying. A deep, deliberate breath, full, controlled, intentional. His shoulders shifted beneath him with purpose. His right leg bent, and his foot planted itself flat against the arena floor with the careful precision of someone choosing a foundation. Across the medical scanner array, indicators that had been burning solid red began to flicker. Some shifted to yellow. A few turned green. "The scanners are malfunctioning," Ree said. He did not believe it. Marcus pushed himself up onto his right elbow. Blood dripped from his mouth, spattering the floor beneath him. His left arm hung completely useless, the broken radius visible as a bulge beneath the skin. But his right arm was moving with something that Vree, after 500 arena matches, recognized immediately with the cold certainty of long experience. Purpose. Not spasm. Not death reflex. Purpose. What is he doing? Macros chitted, all celebration draining from his voice like color from a wound. He should be unconscious. He should be. "Get Dr. Fenton on the link. Now." Vree cut across him, leaning forward, all four primary eyes locked on the human below. Marcus's breathing had changed again. It had become rhythmic, controlled, a pattern that Vree's mind reached for and found, buried in a human combat manual he had been required to read during his tactical training years ago. 4 counts in through the nose. Hold for 4. 8 counts out. Repeat. Box breathing. They called it. A technique developed for emergency situations, designed to force the autonomic nervous system to settle, to override the body's panic response and restore clarity through the center of overwhelming pain. He was not dying. He was calming down. "Dr. Fenton," Bree said when the Queelix physician's face appeared on the view screen, his features already twisted with a particular confusion of someone confronting data that contradicts established models. "Explain what I am seeing." "I am trying to explain it myself, Commander." Fenton's voice was unsteady in a way that 12 years of working together had not prepared Vree to hear. His adrenal system is activated at maximum output. Adrenaline, norepinephrine, cortisol, all flooded simultaneously at concentrations that in most species would cause cardiac failure. His heart rate has spiked to 170 beats per minute. His vascular system is shunting blood away from non-essential organs and flooding his major muscle groups. Pain receptor activity has been chemically suppressed. "All species have adrenaline responses," Vree said. His voice lacked conviction even to his own hearing. "Not like this." Fenton leaned closer to his own display, and when he continued, his voice carried something that Vree could not categorize, or, perhaps, or something at the boundary between awe and terror. Commander, human adrenal systems are disproportionately powerful relative to their baseline physiology. It is an evolutionary remnant. They did not originally exist at the top of their planet's food chain. They were prey animals once. Medium-sized, unarmored, relatively slow. To survive, they developed two things: endurance that allowed them to outlast anything that hunted them, and an emergency biological override that could temporarily transform a creature built for running into something capable of fighting for its life against odds that should have been impossible. Their bodies can suppress damage signals that would shut down any other known species. They can increase effective strength output by significant percentages, and that is before accounting for the factor that cannot be quantified biologically. Bree felt something cold moving through his primary nervous cluster. What factor? Psychological resilience, Commander, willpower. The human brain can override what the body is reporting. It can choose, consciously, deliberately choose, not to quit. Not because quitting has become impossible, but because the individual has decided it is unacceptable. A long pause. It is not rational. It is not efficient. By every metric we use to measure combat effectiveness, it should not matter. But it does. It matters enormously. On the arena floor, Chen was rising to one knee. The crowd had gone silent in a way that felt different from the anticipatory quiet of earlier. This was a silence of collective disbelief, thousands of beings simultaneously confronting the failure of something they had treated as certain. Credits had already been transferred. Accounts had already been updated. Fortunes had already been decided. And yet here was the data, rendered in flesh and blood on the arena floor below, insisting that certainty was a considerably more flexible concept than any of them had accounted for. Thorund had stopped celebrating. The Kraxen champion had turned, all four arms lowering to half-height, his posture shifting in a way that Vree, who had spent his career learning to read fighter body language, identified immediately. Uncertainty, not fear, not yet, but the first crack in the foundation that had held 47 unbroken victories together. He had never seen an opponent get up after that finishing move. Not once. Not in 4 to 7 matches. And some part of him, operating below the level of conscious thought, was beginning to process what that meant. Marcus's head lifted. Bree could see his face clearly on the arena monitors, blood running from a cut above his eye, the nose bent at an angle that would require surgical reconstruction, bruising that had begun to swallow his features entirely. And his eyes, those forward-facing predator eyes, clear and focused and absolutely present, locked onto Thorund with an expression that Vree spent several seconds trying to classify before recognizing it. Defiance. Not the theatrical defiance of arena posturing. Not the desperate, wild-eyed defiance of someone who knows they are beaten and refuses to process it. Something quieter, more considered. The defiance of someone who has looked at the situation with clear eyes, calculated the odds, found them unfavorable, and decided that the odds were simply not the relevant factor. Chen's lips moved. No sound reached the observation pod, but Vree had the translator algorithm running on the audio pickups, and the words appeared on his screen, first in the human's native language, then half a second later in standard galactic. Not finished. 2 words. 8 characters. The most economical possible declaration of war. Marcus pressed his right hand against his thigh, gathered himself with the focused attention of someone conducting a final inventory of available resources, and stood up. The arena remained locked in absolute silence. His left arm dangled useless at his side, swaying with each labored breath. Blood had soaked through his combat suit until the fabric had changed color entirely, dark and wet and still spreading. His face was a composition in damage, every feature altered by the accumulated evidence of 4 prior matches and 23 minutes of the worst punishment the arena could offer. He was a medical emergency that had somehow misplaced its paperwork. And he was grinning, a wide, red-stained, tooth-bearing expression that Vree had encountered before and always filed under human amusement. He filed it differently now. Every other species in the known galaxy had been using the same classification, amusement, because they had been looking at the shape of the expression rather than its function. But standing in the wreckage of his own body, bleeding from locations that Vree preferred not to enumerate, Chen was showing his teeth to the thing that had nearly killed him. It was a threat display. Impossible, Vree breathed. Thorund took 1 step backward. Just 1 step. But Vree had watched enough arena matches to understand exactly what it meant. 4-7 victories, and the champion had never once retreated from a fallen opponent. That single step was a crack running through the foundation of everything, a physical admission that the arithmetic of this fight had changed in ways that Thorund's instincts had not yet fully processed. Marcus spoke. His voice was rough and wet, carrying the audible damage of broken ribs and a tortured chest cavity, but the arena's audio system amplified it cleanly across the silence. "You hit like my grandmother," he said. The translator rendered it in 17 languages simultaneously, and she has been dead for 6 years. The observation pod dissolved into chaos. Psychological warfare. Dr. Fenton's voice crackled over the link. A destabilization technique. He is attempting to convert his opponent's confusion into anger, to force an emotional response that will override tactical discipline. "Is it working?" Mekros asked, mandibles clicking at a frequency that suggested genuine anxiety. They all watched as Thorund's uncertainty collapsed inward and emerged as rage. The Kraxen champion roared, a sound that physically vibrated the observation pod's reinforced glass, and charged forward with all 4 arms extended, the same overwhelming charge that had opened the match, the same force that had crushed dozens of opponents across 4-7 matches. This time, Marcus Chen did not dodge. He stepped forward, into the charge, inside the reach of the grasping upper arms, ducking under them with speed that his damaged body should not have possessed, moving with a sudden explosive quality of something that had been compressing for a very long time. His right fist drove forward and connected with Thorund's throat at the precise moment that 400 kilograms of Kraxen momentum was still fully committed to forward motion, and the impact transferred in both directions simultaneously. Thorund's charge stopped as if he had encountered an invisible wall. The roar cut off, replaced by a wet, choking sound that silenced the nearest tier of spectators. Thorund's lower 2 arms swung around reflexively, but Marcus was already moving, already climbing. He used the Kraxen's own body as a ladder, his right hand finding the gaps between armor plates and using them as handholds, holding himself upward with a single-minded physical determination that ignored every protest his injured body was filing. He got his legs around Thorund's neck, crossed his ankles to lock the position, and coiled his right arm, the only limb still fully functional, around the Kraxen's throat. "Chokehold," Bree said, watching with a focus that had entirely displaced his earlier certainty. But Kraxens can hold their breath for 12 minutes. He cannot maintain that grip long enough. His arm will fail before. Marcus did not try to maintain it. Instead, using his locked position as a fulcrum, he drove his elbow into the same damage point on Thorund's throat. Again, and again, and again. The Kraxen's hands rose to pull him free, but dislodging someone who had locked their entire remaining body weight into a single position required both hands, and both hands on Marcus meant neither hand defending the throat. Thorund spun, trying to use momentum to shake his passenger loose. Marcus held. Thorund slammed himself backward toward the arena wall, trying to crush the human against the energy barrier. Marcus shifted position at the last possible second, the barrier taking the impact differently, the lock maintaining. The elbow kept falling. 8 strikes. 15. 20. Each one precise, each one landing in the same spot with a mechanical consistency of someone who has reduced a problem to its simplest possible components and refused to be distracted from the solution. Thorund's movements began to slow, the coordinated power of his forearms becoming ragged and uneven. His breathing, what he could still manage, came in wet, rattling gasps that spoke of a throat compromised far beyond its design tolerances. 25 strikes. 30. The Kraxen champion dropped to one knee. The arena, which had erupted at Thorund's charge, had fallen silent again. It was a different silence from before, not the silence of disbelief, but the silence of witnesses. Thousands of beings from 17 species, watching something they would describe for the rest of their lives, not quite certain yet whether what they were seeing was triumph or something that transcended the category entirely. Thorund's arm fell to his sides. At 30 strikes, the undefeated champion of the Northern Circuit collapsed forward onto the arena floor with an impact that re-fell through the reinforced structure of the observation pod itself. Marcus Chen rode the fall, releasing his grip only when Thorund's body had gone completely still beneath him. He rolled clear, landed on his back, and stared up at the arena's overhead lights with his right arm stretched out flat at his side, every remaining reserve of his body apparently exhausted simultaneously. His chest rose and fell. On the monitors, Thorund did not move. The medical scanner array confirmed, with the merciless objectivity of calibrated instruments, what everyone watching had already understood. The Kraxen champion was unconscious. His vital signs were present but diminished, the readings of body that had been pushed past its limits by the last mechanism it had failed to account for. He would survive. The damage to his throat was significant but repairable. His record was not. Marcus Chen had won his 5th match. Vree stared at his datapad as the numbers recalculated themselves with the merciless efficiency of automated financial systems. Negative 63,000 credits. His entire tournament profit. Gone. His personal betting stake. Gone. 3 months of accumulated salary, evaporated in the time it had taken a human to decide that the laws of biology were suggestions rather than requirements. The observation pod had dissolved into chaos. Mecrose was clicking his mandibles at a frequency that suggested mechanical distress. Other species were shouting, demanding match reviews, insisting on verification of the betting feeds. Credits were being reversed, retransferred, recalculated. Entire fortunes changing hands as the impossible became recorded fact and the galaxy's financial system scrambled to catch up with what one man's body had just done. On the arena floor, medical teams moved in both directions. Thorund was being loaded onto a gravity stretcher, unconscious, his prized undefeated record existing now only in historical archives. Marcus Chen had initially waved off a medical team that reached him first, a reflex, resuspected, as automatic as breathing, and then had collapsed when he tried to stand, and was now being carried out on a second stretcher. His grin was still visible through the blood and the exhaustion, fading, but present, still there. Commander. Dr. Fenton's image reappeared on the view screen, his expression grave in a way that had moved past professional concern into something more personal. We need to discuss the implications of what we witnessed today. The human got lucky, Vree said. The words fell false in his mouth. The way structural materials felt false under pressure, they were not designed to bear. No, Commander. Fenton shook his head. I have spent the past hour reviewing human physiological data and cross-referencing it against every other species in our combat database. What happened today was not luck. Luck is a factor in single events. What Marcus Chen has done across 5 consecutive matches, against 5 species specifically evolved for violence, cannot be explained by luck. It requires a different framework entirely. Then explain it. Fenton leaned forward. We measured the wrong things. When we evaluate arena potential, we measure strength, speed, natural armor, regenerative capability, all the metrics that predict success in short-duration combat. Humans are unremarkable by every one of those standards. A pause. But there are other categories. Categories we do not typically value because they rarely decide arena outcomes. Pain tolerance through conscious override. Humans possess this to an extent that our models did not account for. Long-duration endurance that allows functional operation far past the shutdown threshold of most other species. A healing factor that is not rapid but is remarkably comprehensive, allowing them to accumulate damage across extended timelines without systemic collapse. And most dangerous of all, psychological resilience. Vree said quietly, more than resilience. Fenton chose his next words with care. Commander, the human brain contains a decision-making architecture that is, by any rational analysis, catastrophically inefficient. It prioritizes persistence over optimization. It will continue executing a losing strategy past all reasonable endpoints because it has assigned value to the act of continuing itself, independent of the probability of success. In a stable environment with predictable rules, this is a disadvantage. In a combat environment where the opponent cannot predict how long you will keep fighting, where the opponent cannot trust that damage translates to defeat, it becomes something else entirely. He paused. It becomes a weapon that cannot be disarmed. The observation pod was quiet now. Even Mecrose had stopped clicking. Consider this, Fenton continued, and something in his voice had shifted, the quality of a mind confronting a genuinely new problem for the first time. One human, untrained in consortium combat methods, unaugmented, unenhanced, armed with nothing beyond his own biology and whatever he could find on the arena floor, defeated 5 consecutive champions, including a Kraxen with 4 to 7 unbroken victories. He did not defeat them by being stronger or faster or better armored. He defeated them by outlasting them, by absorbing damage until they made mistakes, by refusing to accept that damage and defeat were the same thing. Fenton's image held steady on the view screen. "Commander, how many humans are in the Colonial Authority space?" Vree said nothing. "Billions," Fenton said. "What happens if they decide we are the enemy?" The question settled over the observation pod like a change in atmospheric pressure, the kind of change that experienced travelers learn to associate with incoming weather of a particularly serious kind. Vree looked out through the reinforced glass of the arena floor below, where cleaning teams were moving across the blood-stained metal, restoring it for the next event, the next carefully calibrated entertainment, the next set of certainties waiting to be tested. He found that he was genuinely, profoundly relieved that humanity was currently an ally. 2 days later, Vree stood in the departure bay as Chen, left arm in a medical cast, ribs wrapped in regenerative bandaging, made his way toward the transport that would carry him back to human space. He moved stiffly, with the careful deliberateness of someone operating a damaged body that had not yet fully registered the order to stand down. But he moved, already healing, already rebuilding, cell by stubborn cell. "Commander," Marcus said, pausing beside him and offering the small head bob gesture that Vree now understood represented mutual acknowledgement between humans. "Human," Vree replied. All 4 of his primary eyes met Marcus's too. It felt like the appropriate response to someone who had just rewritten the arena's record books and simultaneously revised Vree's understanding of what a species was fundamentally capable of. He had not planned to ask the question. It emerged from somewhere below his conscious decision-making, driven by a need to understand something that his professional experience was insisting mattered, that would keep mattering long after this particular conversation ended. "I must ask," he said, "when I declared you finished, when you were on the floor, and your body had sustained damage that should have ended the match beyond any reasonable doubt, what made you stand up?" Chen considered this for a moment with a thoughtfulness that surprised Vree, as if the answer deserved more than a reflexive response, as if he had been carrying the question for a long time and wanted to answer it properly. "You don't understand humans yet, Commander," he said finally. His voice was still rough from the arena, still carrying the damage of the last 3 weeks, but steady. "We are only finished when we decide we are finished, not when someone else decides for us, not when our bodies file the paperwork. Not when the math says we can't win." He looked at Vree with those clear, forward-facing eyes, and there was something in them, not anger, not pride, but something that Vree's emotional vocabulary did not have a precise word for, something at the intersection of conviction and sadness and absolute certainty. "The moment I heard you announce it over the speakers, 'He is finished,' I knew I wasn't, because you don't get to make that call. None of you do. That's our call. It always has been." He paused at the transport ramp, one hand on the frame, and looked back one last time. "Remember that," he said. Then he limped up the ramp and disappeared into the ship. Vree stood in the departure bay long after the transport had detached and begun its acceleration toward the jump point, carrying Chen back to his people, back to billions of others who had no idea what one of their own had accomplished in an alien arena in the middle of nowhere. He stood there until the ship was a point of light against the stars, and then until even that was gone, swallowed by the dark in the distance. He pulled out his datapad. The subject line came to him immediately: threat assessment revision, species classification, human, priority, agent. He wrote quickly and without hesitation, with the focused efficiency of someone who has been confronted with new information and understands the cost of communicating it poorly. He wrote about the 5 arena matches and their outcomes. He wrote about Dr. Fenton's physiological analysis and its implications. He wrote about the economic losses and what they represented. Not just 63,000 credits, but the comprehensive failure of confident prediction across an entire system of measurement that the consortium had trusted for generations. And at the end, he wrote his recommendation. It was not complex. It did not require elaborate qualification or diplomatic hedging. It was 8 words, and when he read them back, he found that 8 words were exactly sufficient. Never declare a human finished until they choose to be. He approved the report and transmitted it through official channels. Behind him, Mecros had finally gone quiet. The insectoid trader sat in the corner of the departure bay with the subdued expression of someone whose foundational assumptions have taken damage they are still assessing, staring at the last place the transport had been visible. "Do you think they will listen?" he asked. "Your warning," when it reaches Galactic Command, do you think anyone will take it seriously? Vree did not answer immediately. He stood looking out through the viewport of the dark between the stars at the vast space that contained, somewhere in its enormity, billions of small, unarmored, not particularized, entirely too stubborn beings going about their lives completely unaware that one of them had just changed how the galaxy understood them. They will listen, he said at last. He turned from the viewport. Or they will learn the same lesson I did. A long pause. The expensive way. In the station's medical wing, Thorund the Unbroken, whose name would require revision, was regaining consciousness to find that his throat was repairable, his body was intact, and his pride had sustained an injury that no regenerative medicine in the Consortium's pharmacopoeia could address. He would fight again. He would probably win again, reclaiming his standing through the brute arithmetic of physical dominance that had always served him. His record was gone, but records were abstractions. The arena was real. But he would never forget the human who had climbed him like training equipment and beaten him into the floor through nothing but refusal to accept that doing so was impossible. He would think about it in the quiet nights between matches, when the arena was empty and the crowd was gone and there was only the honest accounting of a fighter alone with himself. He would think about what it meant that something so much smaller and softer and more easily broken had looked at the gap between them and decided it was not the most relevant measurement. None of them would forget. In his office, Vree sat in the Nadark with all four eyes and focus on the middle distance, his report already traveling through official channels toward people who would read it with varying degrees of skepticism. Some would dismiss it as an anomaly. Some would schedule reviews. Some, the ones who watched the arena footage with particular attention of beings whose professional function was the assessment of threats, would understand it immediately and begin the long, uncomfortable process of revising their assumptions. He thought about what Dr. Fenton had said, about the evolutionary origins of human stubbornness, that it was not a flaw or an inefficiency or a charming primitive quirk, but an adaptive response developed across hundreds of thousands of years by creatures who survived their world by being the last thing standing after everything else had given up or given in. A persistence built into them at the level of neurotransmitters and hormonal cascades and the deep architecture of a brain that had learned across generations of mortal necessity that stopping meant dying. They had carried that architecture with them into space, into diplomacy and technology and civilization, into alien arenas where the rules were designed by species who had never needed to be the last thing standing because they had always been the strongest thing standing. They had not understood what they were carrying. Neither had the galaxy. Both understood it now. Vree picked up his datapad and added one final line to his report, a note addressed not to Galactic Command, but to the future administrators who would eventually manage humanity's formal integration into consortium affairs. A piece of advice that cost him nothing to give and might, if heeded, save incalculable grief down the line. When humans stand across from you on any field, diplomatic, commercial, or military, do not make the mistake of measuring what they have. Measure what they will not give up. Those are different numbers, and only one of them predicts the outcome. He filed a report and sat for a long time in the quiet dark. Somewhere out in the vast and indifferent black of space, Marcus Chen was already healing, already rebuilding the damage that 5 arena matches had written across his body. In a few weeks, the bones would knit and the bruises would fade and the cuts would close, leaving nothing behind but scars. In a few months, most people looking at him would see only the ordinary surface of a human being, medium height, medium build, nothing that immediately announced itself as remarkable. Only someone who had been in that arena, or who had watched the footage with the right kind of attention, would know to look for the other thing, the thing underneath the ordinary surface, the thing that got up off the floor when it should have been finished, the thing that stood in the face of overwhelming force and decided, with complete clarity and no drama whatsoever, that the force was simply not the relevant factor. The Galactic Consortium would adapt. It always did. In the cycles that followed, when humans stepped onto arena floors or into negotiating chambers or crossed the thresholds of disputes that other species had assumed were already settled, the calculations would be different. The odds would be different. The betting pools would be structured around an acknowledgement that had not existed before one man on one blood-stained metal floor had made it impossible to ignore any longer. You could hurt a human. You could break them, damage them, push them to every biological limit their bodies possess and several that they technically shouldn't. You could make them bleed and fall and lie still long enough to make everyone watching believe it was over. But you could not make them finished. Only they could do that. And as Vree had learned, at a cost of 63,000 credits, one shattered certainty, and a complete revision of his professional worldview, they were very, very reluctant to. Commander Vree leaned forward in his observation pod, all four of his primary eyes converging on the combat floor below with the practiced focus of someone who had witnessed 500 arena deaths and expected this one to be no different. The arena stretched out beneath him like a massive metallic bowl, 300 meters across, its curved walls shimmering with energy shield designed to contain the violence within. Thousands of spectators filled the tiered seating that rose in concentric rings above the floor, their collective noise rising in waves, chittering, growling, howling, and 1,000 other sounds that 17 different species made when blood was in the air. The atmosphere was thick with the acrid bite of ozone, the organic musk of alien sweat, and that sharp, copper-sweet tang that Vree had long since learned to associate with spilled blood regardless of its color. 10,000 credits as the human doesn't get up, chittered Mech rose from a seat beside him, the insectoid trader from the hive cluster clicking his mandibles in the rapid-fire rhythm that Vree had learned to recognize as satisfaction. Mech rose had arrived 3 cycles ago with a cargo hold full of luxury fabrics and a bottomless appetite for gambling, and he had been profitable company ever since, right up until this moment. Vree's secondary eyes swiveled briefly toward his companion, then returned to the arena floor without moving the rest of his body. "I would not take that bet," he said flatly. "Look at him. He is finished." And truly, the human looked finished. His name was Chen, according to the intake files, though Vree had always found human names frustratingly sparse compared to the proper 17-syllable naming conventions of his own people. The human lay crumpled on the blood-slicked metal floor in a configuration that even Vree's limited knowledge of human anatomy told him was deeply wrong. One arm was bent at an angle that violated the basic principles of skeletal design. Dark red fluid, that peculiar crimson substance humans use instead of proper hemolymph, pooled beneath his torso in an expanding stain that caught the arena lights and reflected them back in dark, liquid flickers. His breathing came in shallow, ragged gasps visible even from 50 meters up in the observation pod, each rise of his chest smaller and more bored than the last. Above him, his opponent stood in triumph. Thorund the Unbroken, Kraxen Berserker, champion of the Northern Circuit for 3 consecutive cycles. The creature stood 2.4 meters tall, his armored hide gleaming like burnished copper under the arena's powerful overhead lights, each plate of natural chitin polished to a mirror sheen. All 4 of his arms were raised above his hammer-shaped head, that wide, flat skull with its deep-set eyes protected by bony ridges that could survive impacts capable of shattering reinforced concrete. He turned slowly in place, acknowledging each section of the crowd, and the arena shook with the response. 4-7 victories, 0 defeats. A record so unblemished it had become something close to legend. The crowd erupted. Thousands of beings leapt to their feet across every level of the arena, and credits began flowing through banking systems across the station like water released from a broken dam. Scan complete. Reported Vree's medical aide, a nervous Pelthian named Soth whose skin plates were currently cycling between anxious green and relieved yellow. The human has sustained critical damage. 3 fractured ribs on the left side. Clean break on the left radius. Significant internal bleeding in the abdominal cavity. Probable concussion. Neural activity is declining toward unconsciousness. Vital signs are approaching critical failure thresholds. Commander. Vree settled back into his chair and allowed himself a long, satisfied rumble from his vocal sacs. "He is finished," he announced, his voice resonating through the arena-wide communication system and translating simultaneously into 17 languages. "Prepare medical extraction." He reached for his datapad and watched his account balance climb by 4-7,000 credits. Another successful tournament. Another example of mathematical certainty asserting itself over romantic foolishness. He really should have known better. 3 weeks earlier, Chen had been sitting in a detention cell aboard the prison transport Kuvar's Mercy, which was in Vree's professional opinion the most ironically named vessel in the entire Galactic Consortium fleet. There was no mercy on Kuvar's ships. There was only inventory, logistics, and the careful management of misery. Vree had been present for the intake processing as part of his duty as combat coordinator, reviewing new arrival for arena potential. It was not the most dignified aspect of his role, but it was necessary. Good fighters did not grow on asteroid fields, and the arena's appetite was relentless. The human had been brought into the processing bay wearing restraints that looked comically oversized for his frame, flanked by 2 Gormit guards who had a particular posture of beings who expected trouble, and were faintly disappointed not to be finding any. Marcus Chen had looked around the room with calm, forward-facing eyes, predator eyes, Vree's evolutionary briefings always noted, eyes set in the front of the skull for depth perception and target tracking, and had shown no visible fear. This one, Vree had asked Warden Quilner, a serpentine Vacheron whose iridescent scales caught the fluorescent lighting and scattered it in cold rainbows. He looks barely functional. What did he do? Steal a cargo pod? Quilner's tongue had flicked out, sampling the air with obvious amusement. Worse, Commander. He interfered with a telecrine shipping operation, freed an entire hold full of indentured workers, and caused what I am told was considerable structural damage to Station 47 in the process. The Telecrine Consortium wants him dead, but executing him outright would create diplomatic complications with the human colonial authority. A pause, a reptilian smile. So we offer him the games. Marcus Chen had looked up at precisely that moment, his strange forward-facing eyes finding Vree's primary pair with unsettling directness. Let me guess, he had said, his translator chip rendering the words in smooth standard galactic. I fight, and I maybe don't die. Precisely. Quilner had hissed, clearly delighted. Survive 5 matches in the arena and you earn your freedom. Full pardon, all charges dropped, and safe passage back to human space. A meaningful pause. Die, and the problem solves itself. Everyone wins. Except me, if I lose, Marcus had said dryly. Vree had studied the human's file on his datapad. Height, 1.8 meters. Mass, 82 kilograms. No natural armor plating. No venomous capabilities. Musculature rated below average for typical arena combatants. The species classification noted that humans were persistence hunters, a term Vree had needed to look up, discovering it meant they survived their homeworld's food chain not through strength or speed, but through the biological ability to keep moving long after their prey had collapsed. Interesting in an academic sense. Irrelevant in a practical one.